Is Wall Street waging a capital strike against Trump? Yeah, let's talk about that.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of The Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by the best heart health supplement in the world, Cardio Miracle. So, if you want to lower your resting heart rate, lower your blood pressure while improving your pump at the gym, stick around. We'll talk about that later in today's episode. Or if you're watching the video version of the show, just go ahead and scan that little QR code over my shoulder or head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. Discount should be applied there at checkout. But let's dig into today's topic of conversation. Is Wall Street waging a capital war against Trump? What does that look like? What does that mean? To discuss all that and more, returning to the Brian Nichols Show is Tom Blakely. Tom, welcome back to the show. How you doing?
Doing well, Brian. Thanks for having me back on. It's great to be back. It's great to chat again with you about this one.
For sure, man. I'm really looking forward to today's topic of conversation. And for the folks maybe who did not check out your last appearance here on the Brian Nichols Show, do us a favor, just reintroduce yourself to the audience and kind of talk more about your focus on the financial, economic side of our political process.
Sure. My name's Tom Blakely. I'm a lawyer, currently a federal judicial law clerk in the U.S. courts. Prior to that, I worked at a big law firm. I worked at the Department of Justice and a number of other stops along the way. Just a quick disclaimer, as I made last time, my views or my opinions alone do not reflect the views of my judge or the U.S. judiciary. With that out of the way, I'm happy to be here. I know the last time we spoke about the story of lawfare with big law firms. There were the executive orders that the president was signing that targeted some of these firms. We talked about some of the reaction and kind of the stories, the articles, the op-eds and so forth in response to that. And I'm glad to be here today talking about tariffs. I know tariffs have been just a omnipresent issue in our reality in 2025. So I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be chopping up with you about this.
Looking forward to it, bud. So let's kind of set the stage here, right? You wrote an article over at the Fair Observer, looking into this question. Are voters being held hostage by Wall Street's influence? And that's kind of the overarching theme here today. And I don't want to make it a whole battle between the haves, the have-nots, the Washington and Wall Street elite versus the ground fighters, because that's how we increase tensions where people feel that they need to battle one another, right? So let's talk about this from more of a policy prescription standpoint and just kind of how we got here. So, Tom, give us the overarching ethos of your article. What's happening? What's Wall Street doing? How are they holding control of our politics as you see it?
Of course. So really the lead in my article is that what we're seeing right now and what we've been seeing this year is a situation where investment firms, not so much voters, not the president, not Congress, are getting to decide what the policies of the United States are allowed to be, in this case, with respect to tariffs. Now, I don't think that there's really anything that President Trump has been more clear about in his entire political career or in his campaigns than how much he loves tariffs and how much he believes in tariffs as a solution to a lot of the problems that the country faces. I mean, look, a lot of places in America have been strip mined by free trade and neoliberalism. Much of America's industrial base and the jobs that went with it have been sent overseas. There are communities all across the country that have really been turned into food deserts full of opioids and despair, no social or economic mobility whatsoever. I mean, I guess I can only speak for myself. I, live outside of Boston, spend a lot of time on Cape Cod and in Washington, D.C. And there are places far away from places where maybe you and I are from that you're not going to see in series on HBO Max or whatever the hell they call it. They keep changing the name, or Netflix or TikTok. Like I was in federal court back in May down in coal country. Like if you went up on the roof of this courthouse, you could hit a golf ball into West Virginia, like down in that geography. And it's not a place where I think a lot of Americans, or maybe the kind who listen to podcasts and are, well-to-do, spend a lot of time. But the things you see, like I was in court and you had this big coal case with all these big law firms, fancy attorneys there. And then the next party that was called was a guy with no lawyer, dirty clothes, you can tell he had health problems just based on the way he was carrying himself. Like, there are places in the United States who have been really deeply and darkly affected by, what I think the president believes tariffs are intended to solve, to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States, to, really help some of these communities that have lost everything. And so what you have seen this year since, the inauguration is every time the president enacts these tariff policies to one extent or another, the market tanks, right? You put on the news, everything's red, all the arrows are pointing down, and very quickly the president will reverse course or, alternatively delay the rollout of tariffs. There's been this expression taco, Trump always chickens out. You can kind of, debate what's going on there in terms of the cause and effect, but it's gotten to a point where, can we implement policies it seems like voters wanted, or are we really just held hostage by Wall Street's reaction to those policies? And I think it's opened up a pretty interesting discussion.
Well, let's dig into this, right? Because I know in your article you talk about the whole chicken and the egg problem, right? But help us understand, I guess, first and foremost, why is it that the Trump administration is so fixated on tariffs? Because as a libertarian, or the biggest of small L's, right, in front of the name, I am a big believer in free markets, right? Now, back during the beginning of this whole discussion, and folks can go back and watch any episode of the Brian Nichols Show where we've discussed tariffs at length, I've been the person saying, all right, from a businessman perspective, right, which I am a sales executive for my day job, I negotiate contracts literally every single day. I was looking at tariffs as a negotiation tool. Bring a country to the table. Say, hey there, Xi, you got 35% tariffs on us. We're going to put 35% tariffs on you. And the goal would be, let's lower our tariffs, preferably to zero, right? That was the idea. Let's take countries that are not being favorable from their tariff policies. America enact a tariff policy and then try to have it be a negotiation tool to bring tariffs down. Better for all countries and frankly, better for the consumer, right? Because at the end of the day, as we know, tariffs are nothing more than taxes on the end consumer. So with that being said, I wasn't as, negative towards the tariffs just from an onset positioning, not from a libertarian perspective. I know tariffs are bad because tariffs are, at the end of the day, taxes. But again, from being a tool in the tool belt, that was my mentality. So why is it, though, that we fast forward to here we are as we're recording in September, tariffs are still a conversation piece. And not only are they a conversation piece, but they're being leveraged despite other countries lowering their tariff barriers. And it almost feels like Trump actually likes just tariffs by their nature, Tom. So help us understand, why is there such a fascination from the Trump administration around tariffs?
Sure. Well, I think there's two prongs to it. One of them is that the tariff can be used for the purpose of the tariff in and of itself, which is to provide a cushion that incentivizes companies who are either manufacturing them in other countries, bring them into the United States, to manufacture those things here. In other words, if you're producing something overseas, when you bring it in, a tariff is applied to the wholesale price on the import. And then to a certain extent, depending on how the numbers work, at a certain level, it either becomes just as profitable or perhaps more profitable to make those things in the United States. And of course, you could get into the nitty gritty of the math, but that's just the overall basic economic idea of the tariff. The other prong is to alternatively, and this seems like something that the president has used in some cases, to your point, and in other cases is more interested in the overall policy goal of tariffs that I just outlined, has used it as sort of a cudgel, as a negotiating tool to have something to, I guess you could say, threaten other countries with, or use, to bargain for, in exchange for some other policy change or lowering their tariffs. The problem with the latter is that it deprives the country of the benefit of the tariff for domestic manufacturers when it's only being used as a negotiating tool and to no other end. So, you've seen stories about certain domestic manufacturers, or the ones that are left, have benefited in some cases. Now all of a sudden they can't keep up with demand because, okay, well, if widgets or tin or steel or whatever it is, as these things fluctuate with tariffs, they see their business go up and go down. What you referred to there about the idea at the end of the day being focused on the consumer is something that's called the Consumer Welfare Standard, which is an important legal principle. It was pioneered in late 1970s, 1980s by Robert Bork, who was a failed nominee to the Supreme Court. Really pioneered this idea that antitrust law, trade should really be focused on the consumer. What we've seen, however, in the decades since 1980, where we've had neoliberalism, we've had free trade, is that looking beyond the consumer, there are all of these follow-on effects down the line. When your manufacturing base is sent overseas, all of the jobs, all of the communities that revolved around those industries that have now been outsourced to somewhere else suffer pretty severely. We saw during COVID, if you don't make ventilators and you don't make all of these critical things in your country, that's a problem with the wars in Ukraine, and other wars around the world. If you don't make shells, if you don't make steel, if you don't make weapons, all these things, I mean, do you think the Chinese are going to give us those things when there's a war? There are important strategic considerations just beyond low prices on items that you have to consider. And that's what this administration has been doing, which is a break with, recent decades of policy.
If the bottom fell out tomorrow, would you be ready? Not just with food and water. I'm talking about protecting your money, your family, and your freedom. And that's why you need the Expat Money Online Summit, October 10th through the 12th. My good buddy Mikkel Thorup, host of the Expat Money Show, is bringing together top experts from around the globe to show you how to legally protect your wealth, secure a second residency or citizenship, cut your tax bill, and even own property abroad. And this year's focus is Latin America, and the opportunities are massive. Argentina is moving toward free markets. El Salvador is transforming. Panama and Paraguay are offering simple residency programs. Guys, a plan B isn't optional anymore. It's essential. And the best part, the summit is 100% free. Just grab your tickets at expatmoneysummit.com. And hey, if you want a lifetime replay access and exclusive VIP panels, grab the upgrade and use promo code TBNS for 20% off your ticket. That's expatmoneysummit.com, promo code TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show. So let's talk more about how we got here with Wall Street, right? Because I guess the question, this is a question you raise in your article, is who actually is making policy in America? Is it the voters and their elected leaders, or is it Wall Street? And I know you mentioned in the article, if you look at how Wall Street is reacting, they're not so much reacting to the regulatory landscape, really as much as Trump is making policy around pacifying Wall Street. So talk to us more about that.
Sure. So you have to understand, America has, at least in today's day and age, and this has been increasingly the case over time, America has a financialized economy. So what that means is that pretty much anything worth anything has been captured by the finance class. So the housing market, retirement funds, mortgages, your savings account, how you make large purchases, your credit card, pretty much anything that isn't nailed down has been converted into a financial product or some kind of financial market. So, if it hasn't, someone's probably trying to figure out how to do that right now as we speak. So when there are policies that Wall Street doesn't like, it has an immense amount of leverage to essentially blow the dam. I think that's the expression I used in the article. So in other words, if the president decides, okay, we're going to roll out this tariff on goods that are being, this product or, this country, whatever it is, and Wall Street doesn't like that, and everybody's, the colors turns from green to red, the arrow points from up to down, the market's going down, that has a lot of effects on the country. People's retirement funds go down precipitously. There can be layout, everything runs through in today's day and age in a way that it hadn't in the past through financial markets. And so when Wall Street isn't happy about a policy, there's tremendous leverage to tank other parts of the economy. And that has a serious effect on workers, on consumers, on really every touch point with the economy. So, and that's a problem because it gets to a point where you say, okay, well, are voters allowed to decide, okay, this candidate and the policies they're advocating for are something we want, or does Wall Street get a heckler's veto over what the policies are? I think the latest example of this, very much related to what we're talking about, has been the status of the Fed chair, Jerome Powell. Everybody knows the president wants to cashier this guy. He doesn't like him. He thinks that he's been too late to lower interest rates. I think a lot of people will say he was too late to raise interest rates a few years ago when inflation got out of control. And that's something that's playing out. Just this last couple of weeks, we've heard the Supreme Court is going to weigh in on the whether or not the president is able to do that, and that implicates something else. People talk about Fed independence, which I think, and I mentioned this in the article, is a bit of a misnomer. Like the idea of Fed independence, there was this great article in 2009 called "The Finance Club" in the New York Times, which detailed how really there's just kind of this club of finance guys in New York in conjunction with the Federal Reserve Chair called, like, it's not really independent in the sense of the word. Like what you really have on the one hand is this idea of democratic control of the Fed. In other words, the voters and their elected officials versus what's happening on the other hand, which is this kind of clubby relationship of financiers and bankers who have a lot of influence. And of course, that's not something
it's like no more gym bros. It's the finance bros.
Right. The finance bros. And if you're a finance bro, you don't want that to change. You don't want people in Washington to in the voters to have control over the interest rates. You want it to be you, right? And so that's another thing that's playing out right now. Every time you can go back and look at the news, every time Trump goes on Truth Social and pounds out posts about wanting to get rid of Powell, the market goes down, right? So it's like, how much control do we want Wall Street to have versus how much control are voters and their elected officials supposed to have? I think it's an important discussion.
Well, and I guess what's that fine line, right? Because, I mean, elephant in the room, and we're recording here today on September 13th. Like, you see right now as a country, we are, dare I say, a little polarized. I mean, we're recording here a couple days after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and you see the reaction from a very significant portion, Tom, of our American electorate who, if they're not excusing it, they're outright celebrating it. Like it's I don't know, it's dark, right? It's a very dark world that we're in right now. But I say that because do we want some of those folks actually determining which direction our country goes via the ballot box in terms of our finances, right? So I kind of see like the yin and the yang here. It's like, yes, I want the American public to have a voice, but I also want folks who are living in this world every single day to also have a voice, because I'm sure that they're seeing things behind the scenes that we don't see. So what's that fine line? I mean, we see the Trump administration leading with tariffs, but is that really the administration's job? Isn't that a role that's supposed to be dictated by Congress, right? So I guess help us kind of, if we could, paint a picture of where the yin and the yang are coming together, Tom.
Sure. Well, obviously, like you mentioned, I mean, this is, right now, just in the days after, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, this is certainly a dark chapter in the time and really in the life of our nation. And it's nothing short of horrific what happened. And, sort of like you indicated, we're a very polarized country. I mean, there's no question about that. And that, really applies to almost every debate you want to have. I mean, in this case, we're talking about, I think, something that's a little bit less, polarizing, I guess you could say, tariffs. It's not exactly as, I think as, it doesn't exactly impassion people as much as maybe some other topics do, but it's certainly something that people disagree about. I think for a long time, we had to choose, or voters had to choose, between politicians who existed within the 45-yard lines, to use a football analogy of American politics. Like when you look back at, Bush and Clinton and then Bush and then Obama, like look back to, like, I guess the example you use is the 2012 election, right? Where you had Mitt Romney and President Obama at the time. Like at the time we thought, okay, this is, which way is it going to go? We thought there's a lot of difference between those guys. But in 2025, looking back, was there really much of a difference between Mitt Romney and Obama? Like, right. I mean, I see you shaking your head, like maybe on some things, but generally speaking, on the one hand, you have this like technocratic, corporatist, centrist elite, cultural elite in Obama. On the other hand, you have this like leveraged finance, Harvard bro and Mitt Romney. Like, were they really that different on trade, on foreign policy? Like, I think for a long time, voters came to feel like there were just certain things we're not allowed to vote about or vote on. Like after 2008, you remember the Tea Party, in this emerging populist movement that is against, I think Steve Bannon, I don't know if he coined the term or he just uses a lot, neoliberal neocons, this idea of like, free trade, endless wars. I mean, you can debate those policies, but the reality is there's a lot of Americans who feel this way. And I think over time, what we're starting to see now is the fraying of what for many, many years was kind of this establishment, clubby, bipartisan DC consensus. And a lot of people don't like that. And it's playing out imperfectly. But I think right now we're standing at this inflection point where that old system is getting pried apart by voters. And in some cases, these passions are being played out violently, and that's not good. But there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of division right now about a lot of different things. And I think we just have to wait and see where it goes, and hopefully it plays out peacefully and not in the way that we've seen as of late.
You've spent your whole life building something meaningful, a career, a family, a legacy. But none of that matters if your health can't keep up. And the truth is, as we age, our body's natural production of nitric oxide, which is vital for circulation and heart function, declines sharply. And that drop increases your risk for high blood pressure, poor oxygen flow, and even cognitive decline. You don't feel like yourself, and no doctor seems to have an answer that doesn't involve more prescription medication. And that's why I recommend Cardio Miracle, because it's an all-in-one blend of nitric oxide boosters like L-arginine, L-citrulline, organic beets, and more that support your cardiovascular system, brain function, and your immune response. It's not about reversing time. It's about giving your body what it needs to keep showing up strong. You've worked too hard to feel like you're fading. So, scan that little QR code over my shoulder, click the link in the show notes, or go to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS and get back in control of your health. And look for the little note saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols on the Cardio Miracle homepage. One more time, that's cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, well, and to that point, right? Like, we got to see where it goes. I'm wondering, Tom, where do you think it goes? Because we are, it's always tough, to your point. Like, I don't want to keep on saying these are unprecedented times, because if anything, we see a recurring theme of, if history isn't repeating itself, it certainly rhymes. Mm-hmm. This feels like we are in the 60s again, right? Where you're having political assassinations, you're having a populist uprising. You think back to the 60s, we had the Vietnam War that was starting to go towards the tail end of the conflict. And all the protests therein. You had the campus protests, Kent State. You have RFK, Martin Luther King Jr. All these Malcolm X, these political leaders being assassinated. JFK, obviously, sitting U.S. president. And you fast forward to where we are today in the 2020s, you're seeing the populist uprising once again. You're seeing the political assassinations with what we just saw happen with Charlie Kirk, or the attempted assassinations twice with Donald Trump. So I guess I say all that to you, like, where do you think this goes? Are you going to look towards history to see what happened back then to what could happen today? Like, are we going towards what happened in 1971 kind of vibe, right? Because everybody, you see the bar graphs, right? Something happened in 1971. What was it? And you see all the chaos come from that. But then it also leads to a massive political swing. You have folks like, people don't forget, Richard Nixon won the 1972 election with one state that he didn't win. And I think it was Minnesota. I could be wrong. But like you see this where there was a big resurgence towards more of this Republican, conservative, small L libertarian ethos, and then leading with the Ronald Reagan times of the 80s. Was it perfect? No, but I'm just curious. Like, are we going to go more of that direction, or do you think we might go somewhere else?
Sure. Well, just as you were speaking, I'm reminded of an article that I believe came out in the early days of COVID and the first Trump administration that talked about how I think it talked about like how officials were searching through. It was a little bit odd the way they framed it, but it made sense that they were looking through the history of America to try to find historical parallels to tell people we'll get through this. We've gone through it before COVID. It was a little bit of a unique challenge. There were other things going on that year, but like you indicated, what we're going through right now is something we've gone through before. Of course, no analogy or historical parallel is perfect, but you are right to point to the 1960s where there was, the assassination, among others, of, Martin Luther King, of RFK, JFK, Malcolm X. I mean, the Vietnam War protests, civil rights. There was a lot of discord in that decade, and it seems like we're living through, somewhat unfortunately, similar times to those nowadays. And I was on my way home from dinner last night. I was listening to satellite radio, and the show was talking about, as you were sort of indicating there, this sort of seesawing effect, this cycle of history, it seems like we go through, where you had the chaos of the 60s and 70s that were followed by sort of the law and order of Reagan. And I think Clinton was more of a conservative Democrat. President Bush came in, obviously 9/11 affected things. And then the recession happens. The Iraq war turns into this, fiasco. One of the great books about the Iraq war is called Fiasco. That takes you into the 2010s and President Obama. Things are going back to the left. If you think about President Obama, he ran as a populist. I mean, if you listen to some of his sound bites from 2007, 2008, he was against Wall Street. He was, fat cats on Wall Street, right? Like all these expressions. And then he comes into office and bails out the big banks and, starts to become more of an influencer in certain ways, kind of identifying with sort of cultural elitism and a lot of these, forces that, whether that's like apathy about middle America, other cultural issues that resulted in that which came after him, which was President Trump, right? And so now you're seeing these forces playing out once again. And I think it's something where, unfortunately, our interest and desire to know what's going to happen next is something that evolves more slowly than our perception of time, right? Like what we've just been talking about are events that took place over 40 years, right? It's impossible today to sit here and say where things are going to go. But I think there are some things we do know. I think, for one, the elephant in the room, and people talk about, what's the future of the Democratic Party? How are they going to appeal to voters again? If you think about, President Trump's first term, there was the resistance, right? It was constant. There was this strong Democratic Party that was a counterweight. Not in this term, right? I think they've been trying to figure, okay, where do we go from here? And a lot of people will say, well, you have to be a populist working class party. That's where the momentum is. And do they want to do that? Can they do that? But do they want to do that? Who knows right now, right? So I think that whoever is able to respond to what it seems like voters really want, who's willing to do that, who's interested in doing that without, maybe veering into other areas that are as divisive, cultural issues, etc. It seems like that's where the puck is going. It's a question of who wants to skate to it, and we don't know.
Well, and this kind of goes to, another side of the aisle, not political aisle, but more, I guess, the conversation. That is, do American voters actually know what they want? This kind of goes to the H.L. Mencken quote. The idea of democracy is the average person knows what they want, and they deserve to get it good and hard. And I've used that quote looking at New York City, for example, where New York City seemingly is getting ready to vote for a literal socialist. I would actually say that might be too nice to call him a socialist. He's a borderline communist in Zoran Mandani. By the way, we had a great episode a few weeks ago. We'll go ahead and include that link in the show notes, so please go ahead and check that out. But I mean, do the voters actually know, Tom, what they want? And is it possible that in pursuit of this populist vision, right, where voters are voicing their values through the ballot box, are we going to get a tangibly worse outcome from that?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. It reminds me of a quote that I think was ascribed to Steve Jobs, who, would say that, customers don't even know what they want. In other words, people would say, oh, I wish this Apple product did this or that. And he was always very innovative.
Oh, by the way, that reminds me of a Henry Ford quote. He goes, if I had asked the customer if what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, right? Versus an automobile.
Right, yeah.
So same exact vibe.
Yeah,
yep.
It's exactly right. I think the difference in this case, though, is with voters. I think what we've seen, and it's something I always notice, and it's just so bizarre to me, and it's been particularly the case after the last election in 2024, is this tendency of, I think, the more establishment political types. I think just given the outcome of the last election, in this case, it's the Democrats who are doing the the post-mortem, but, it depends on the way the elections go, is to sort of like question voters or to sort of say, like, I think I saw this post somewhat recently, maybe it was within the last month, where one of these prominent, it's a prominent Democrat, I think, was saying, well, the problem with these working class voters is that they're too far to the right. And I remember thinking to myself, are the voters competing for your support, or are you competing for their vote? Like which, in a certain extent, voters are infallible in our, like, voters get to decide who their leaders are. I mean, maybe sometimes they pick people who you can debate in retrospect, were those good leaders? Did they do a good job? But the way our system works is the voters get to decide, right? And so with New York, for example, I mean, the other people that the voters were had the choice of on the dinner menu there was a former governor who left office in disgrace with all kinds of things,
killed grannies. What the heck?
Yeah, killed grannies, and the misconduct. You had Eric Adams, who was
I was gonna say, wasn't that quote? He was killing grannies and grabbing fannies.
Yeah,
it's not funny.
But no, yeah. And then you had Eric Adams was jammed up by the feds for stuff like. If these are your choices, this is who the voters get to choose from. And you look at the issues, I don't live in New York. I don't go to New York too often, but when I have gone, it's very expensive. And I can imagine it's only more expensive if you actually try to live there. And so, there are a lot of rich people in New York City, but their vote doesn't count for more than, other people's vote does. And so the vote is what the vote is. Now, if it's a disaster, I mean, it looks like he's going to be the next mayor, then maybe that's a cautionary tale. If it isn't, it isn't. But, ultimately things went the way they went. The voters had the choices they did. They had the issues that they had. And it seems like he had a more compelling platform than the other two guys did. And, ultimately the vote is what the vote is.
The vote is what the vote is. But man, I am concerned about the outcome because I say I'm concerned about the outcome more so from a human perspective. Like, there are going to be people who they will absolutely suffer from a Zoran Mandani administration. And the folks that Zoran is going after, right? The billionaires, the millionaires, they can leave and they will leave. They have left. We saw in COVID, folks left these big blue cities in droves. I was one of them. I left Philadelphia in 2021 because I saw how bad things were getting, and all of a sudden being asked to show my papers to go to a restaurant because of COVID, or wear a mask outside because feelings, vibes, the science. Like, this was where I know I was, and I know lots of other folks were as well. Fast forward to today, it's going to be more of an economic response. And I mean, where are those billionaires and millionaires going to go? They're going to go to Florida. They're going to go to Tennessee. They're going to go to Texas. They're going to move out of these big blue cities like New York City, LA, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Detroit, Boston. They're going to leave. And who can blame them? And that's just going to make things worse because, to your point, costs in New York City, they're pretty darn expensive, right? And all of a sudden, you're going to be losing all of that tax base, which to the city, that's just a big dollars and cents that they see as tax revenue that they can spend on pet projects. What happens when you no longer have the money for these pet projects? What happens when the tax base leaves in mass because they say, you know what? I'm not going to give you 50% of my income or more, which is being proposed by folks like Zoran Mandani. I don't care that you're saying, oh, well, it's going to make things so much better. You're going to have a positive outcome too. I don't care. I'm going to move to Tampa. I'm going to move to Dallas. I'm going to move to Nashville because I know that at the very least, they're not going to tax me to death. And I can invest my money as an investor, as a billionaire or whatever it may be, in areas that I see fit, not that you, Mr. or Mrs. Government official, see fit. So I know there's going to be a very real human cost here, but at the very least, Tom, it's going to give us a case study to really dig into. Like, let's compare and contrast what happens when you embrace literal socialist communist policies in the biggest city in the United States versus what we're seeing actually happen in these more right-wing red states and some localities like Tennessee, Florida, Texas, and the aforementioned red states. And we can compare and contrast the outcomes. I know there are other folks that are going to, dig their heels and then say, well, that's because it wasn't done properly. Okay. Let's talk about what actually comes from this. So that's my final thoughts, I guess, for today, Tom. Lots of question marks, but lots of stuff we can start to look into to actually compare and contrast effectiveness. I think I know which way it's going to go. I think the audience, after our conversation today, they can kind of see the writing on the wall as well. But bring us home. What do you want the audience to take away from today's conversation?
Well, I think just going off your final point there about cities, I know you rattled off a number of cities that have a lot of issues. I think you mentioned COVID there. I think that a big part of that discussion really is COVID. Like if you think about it, that point in time, coming out of the pandemic, like that broke the economic model of a lot of cities. Work from home, office rents going down, all of the restaurants, things that depend on that. Homelessness, mass migration, like that period of time created a lot of problems for cities. And I think there's a question of how do you how do you fix these problems? Because I mean, look, you go to any city, they're dealing with a lot of the same issues in America today, and it's a problem. Like I'm not a big city guy, but a lot of the things you mentioned are a big problem. And there's a question of how do you fix them? Like you can't go back to before COVID, and like you can't uninvent work from home. You can't make these restaurants. Like it's a big issue. And there's, I think, a lot of questions playing out right now about how do you fix them? I think Zoran seems to have his ideas. Other people have their ideas, and we don't know. And it's nothing that you can fix simply. These are not easy problems to solve. And I think it really does dovetail with a lot of the other economic issues we were talking about, just about the state of the economy in America today. I think one of the big refrains, I think first President Biden was doing this, and now I think, Trump's kind of doing the same thing. There's different methodologies of saying, look, the economy's great. But if nobody believes that, and if people's experience with if you go to CVS and everything's under lock and key and no one works there, and like all of the ways you interact with the economy are terrible, you can show me the GDP all you want, but for voters, it doesn't really matter, right? And so I think that right now there is a big divide that seems to be getting wider between the way the political elite and the financial elite talk about and want to manage the economy, and the way that regular people interact with and experience the economy, and the things that they want versus the things that economists say we want. And this idea of elite impunity, right? That after 2008, there were really not any meaningful consequences after the Iraq War, things like that. These big things that disproportionately poor people, regular people bear the brunt of. The fact that we just kind of march on with a lot of these same policies that are, I think a lot of our leaders are sort of turning a blind eye on what regular people think and feel and experience. That's a big divide right now. And we have to, see where it goes and what solutions people who want to run for office have to offer. And we're living in divisive times. And I think these are a lot of the major divisions that we have.
Yeah, preach, man. Well, Tom, it's been a great conversation. I know I always get a lot of value from our chats, and I know the audience, based on the feedback we've gotten, they get a lot of value from our chats as well. So we'll make sure we have you back on the show, talk about all the crazy things that are happening here in the world of politics, of economics, of finance, with them finance bros. But now, with that being said, where can folks go ahead if they want to reach out, continue the conversation? Best ways to do that?
Sure. Well, I'm on X, as it seems like everyone does. I post all my articles there. I'm just my name, just very phonetic. Just type it in. I come right up. So I post all my articles there. I also post them on LinkedIn as well. I'm sure you have your social channels that this comes out on, but that's where I post all my content. You can Google me, Muckrack, all those places. I'm not hard to find.
Good stuff. Well, Tom, thank you again for joining the show. And folks, if you got some value from today's episode, yes, please go ahead, give it a share. When you do, tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. As for the Brian Nichols Show, you can find it on all your different socials and your different platforms. If you like video versions of the show, head to YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Or for the audio versions of the show, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, Podcast Addict, wherever it is you consume your podcast content. And by the way, we do air our show live on Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays at 9 p.m. Eastern over on X, Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble. So please go ahead, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single time we have a brand new episode going live. But with that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on The Brian Nichols Show. For Tom Blakely, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.